Yeah, thanks very much. So my topic given was how to restore femoral and tibial rotation. I give this talk for Roland Becker. He gives you all his greetings, but he can't be here, so he's very sad about that. But I try to be a good substitute for him. So these are my disclosures. The most common problem when it comes to revision surgery is rotational problems. And as you can see here, so this is a typical problem. This is a lateral asymmetric flexion instability. You see it on the Kamikaze view, that there is a lateral lift-off. You see patella maltracking. Patella is loaded more on the lateral patellar facet. And then you assess patella rotational position of the femoral component, and you see it's 7-degree internal rotated. Why do you have to assess? Why do you have to have these numbers? You have to have these numbers because this is your reference for revision surgery. If you don't know what the position of your femoral component was before you go into revision surgery, then it might become very difficult because all your landmarks you have in normal primary total knee arthroplasty might not be there. So what I'd like to do is we like to go through all these landmarks, and then we see what is actually the best landmark to use, and that's our recommendation. So the ideal femoral rotation we know should be like this. You have the balance, flexion, and extension gap. In a malrotation, you see an internal rotated or external rotated. You see the patella is actually tracked laterally or medially, and also you have an asymmetric flexion gap. And this might lead in internal rotation situation to patella subluxation, patella dislocation, and typically for more external rotation, which is rarer, more rare than the internal rotation, you have more overloading of the lateral femoral component, tibiofemoral component, and you have a lift-off on the medial side. So for me, this Kamikaze view is very important to identify these cases preoperatively, and then we can address those in revision arthroplasty. So these are the general landmarks you have for the femoral rotation. You have the Whiteside's line, you have the anatomical and the surgical transepicondylar axis, and you have the posterior condyles. But when it comes to revision arthroplasty, very often some of these landmarks are not really there. So for example, the posterior condyles you can't really judge, and the surgical transepicondylar axis seems to be the most reliable one if you still have bone up there. If not, in particular when it comes to hinge situations where you need a hinge when the medial or lateral collaterals are not there, then this is a very different topic, because then you have to identify your rotation by your rotation of the foot and also of the femoral bone. So when it comes to landmarks on the femoral side, we have all these landmarks. The problem of this landmarking is that these landmarks have a wide spread. So their median or the mean is quite clear, but when it comes to the spread, you see normally in a big series you see a spread from 13 degrees of internal rotation to 16 degrees of external rotation. So that means most of these landmarks are not very reliable. The only one you can rely on in revision is actually the surgical transepicondylar axis, and then you can use a ligament balancing technique to make this stable again. For the tibial rotation, we have a recent paper from Mosa Farini and the European Knee Associates, which looked at the different landmarks for tibial rotation. So these are the different landmarks. There are so many landmarks published, and always, if you have so many landmarks published to define your rotation, that means no landmarks is optimal. When it comes to judgment, so the Akagi's line seems to be the best reliable landmarks, but there have been modification to these lines, and so it's the original Akagi's line which has been based on this review to the best landmark. But at revision, again, we have the problem that we have bone loss. That means that we are going lower and lower, and that means the landmarks change as well. So the anterior border changes, the posterior condylar line is not the same, because some take off at primary surgery osteophytes. When you have a symmetric tibial plate, you take off osteophytes in the medial or lateral part, or also for the asymmetric ones, it's probably that some bone has changed from primary to revision situation. And then you do your tibial cut and you go lower again. That means the rotation is much harder to understand. From my perspective, I think It's a very good tool not to go extramedullary. You should go intramedullary. With the intramedullary alignment, you have a better orientation of your landmark situation, and it has been proven that intramedullary alignment, if possible, and this depends on the offset you have, is the best option to go for rotation. And on another page, also your approach actually influences the tibial rotation. We have shown in the study on primary total knees, but we also looked at it in revision situations, that you have, when you use a medial parapatellar approach versus a lateral parapatellar approach with a tibial tubercle osteotomy, you tend to internally rotate your tibial component. With a lateral approach, you tend to externally rotate your your tibial component, and that means your approach also influences your view and exposure that relates to your rotation afterwards. And then the thing is, not one reference is the reference to use. You should use a combination of references, and this is the Simon Talbot's paper looking at reference for primary knee arthroplasty, and you can see that the combination of some references, and in particular the sulcus line and the posterior condylar line and the transepicondylar axis, actually gives the best reference for the femur. At the end, I'd like to mention another point, because when we look at our knees, these knees are very different, so that means the rotation is different. So we looked at the 3,000 knees, and we found that there is a massive rotational deformity in the primary situation, and this is also reflects to the revision arthroplasty situation even more. That means that you put every knee with the same rotation, you will fail also in the primary situation, in the secondary situation. So when you do revision arthroplasty, I think the best reliable technique in this situation is a ligament balancing technique or a gap balancing technique. So I think the future of rotation, it hasn't been proven, and so from my perspective, it will become more complicated than more simple, and this is the hard thing, because most of us only do a few of revision knee arthroplasties, and so I think this is the major problem. The instrumentation needs to be more reliable, more easy to use, and define as a good situation for rotational correction. So summarizing my talk is, use a combination of landmarks. You have to look and you have to plan preoperatively for your revision situation which landmarks you have available, and then use a combination of all these landmarks. If the surgical transepicondylar axis is available on the femoral side, this is the most reliable thing, then use ligament balancing. It's better than measured resection in these situations, in particular for the revision situation. On the tibial side, if you can use the Akagis line, this is the most reliable one, but also use a combination of all those. I like intramedullary alignment because it gives you a more reliable situation intraoperatively. And what you have to consider on the tibial side is, do you use a symmetric or asymmetric tibial component? If you use a symmetric one, then you shouldn't put it just on the bone. Don't rely on the bony surface. You have to rely on other landmarks. And then finally, no fixed rotation adapted to the individual knee you have in front of you. Thank you so much.